All right, good evening, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are. My name is Jürgen Steinmetz, and I'm joining you from livestream.travel, eTurbo News in Honolulu. And today we're actually here for the World Tourism Network Aviation Interest Group. And this is our first launch. And we have the president of the aviation group with us, Vijay Poonoosamy. I know I pronounced your name wrong. I know Vijay for a long time, but I have problems with his name. It's it's a little bit complicated for Germans to pronounce, I guess. But it'll be a very interesting session. We have two of them. If you missed this, there's going to be another one in 2 days at a more friendly time zone for North America. But this one, I think we'll have people mostly from Asia and possibly from Europe. It's morning time in Europe joining us. And it'll also be live streamed on eTurbo News, on YouTube, on Facebook, and all these social media channels and on live stream. So without further ado, I just wanted to welcome Vijay, who's been working hard on our aviation interest group, and he can tell you more. And then, of course, we can go around and we keep this an open forum, like always, so you can get your input or ask questions and so forth. Hi, Vijay. How's everything in Singapore?
Not too bad, actually. It's a nice sunny day, and greetings to everybody. And thank you for having joined this call. Basically, it's meant to be a brainstorming session on the activities of the Aviation Interest Group of the World Tourism Network, which I have the honor to serve as chairman. I'd like you, if you would please keep your video on and your microphone off. The Aviation Interest Group was created last December to provide a safe and inclusive space for travel and tourism stakeholders to have candid discussions about the formidable challenges affecting aviation and to help rebuild confidence in the trustworthiness, safety, security, predictability, and positive community value of travel and tourism. Our first event was the inaugural panel series entitled Plane Talk, which was held on 17 December, and which actually proved to be an interesting hour-long discussion on COVID-19 and the environment with Professor Jeffrey Lippman, who was the president of Southern Malta and former IATA executive director, UNWTO Assistant Secretary General, and first WTDC president. We had Adefunke Adeyemi, who is IATA's regional director for Africa. And we had Dr. Susan Becken, who is professor on sustainable tourism at Griffith University in Australia. In this session, we seek your suggestions on two matters. First, how can we be more effective given our mandate? And two, what specific topics should we address? So bearing these two matters in mind, I'd like to start with the how. How do you think this group can contribute more effectively to helping deal with the challenges aviation is currently going through? So what I like to do is to ask you to intervene, raise your hand, or go to the reactions at the bottom of your screen and press the raise hand. Or you can also type in your suggestion in the chat at the bottom of your screen. Or you can email me at v.poonoosamy, Poonoosamy at wtn.travel. I'll put that address in the chat right now. So when I call on you, please unmute your microphone, introduce yourself, and succinctly address the how. If this is okay with you, we'll start with this process now. Anyone wants to jump in first?
Vijay, sorry, this is Mike here. I'm calling in from Hong Kong. And thank you for the invitation today, Vijay. May I ask if it's possible just to remind everybody, because this is my first time, what is the given mandate that you have in order to answer the how? I've actually sent some questions to Jürgen, but I'm not sure if they're relevant to necessarily the topics. Obviously, that's a selfish questions that I asked that Jürgen has. But maybe I could ask you just quick
very quickly.
2 minutes about the mandate.
Yeah, correct. See, when you look at the world of international civil aviation, you have the known international organizations, whether it's ICAO, IATA, ACI, and CANSO, and then regional organizations. You have WTTC. So the idea is to find a space, and that's why this group was created, and to where people who actually are interested in, connected with, or involved with the travel and tourism sector can actually discuss, debate, and hopefully offer some suggestions which would help travel and tourism do better in terms of rebuilding the confidence which is obviously required today in terms of trustworthiness, in terms of safety, the predictability, and the positivity of travel and tourism, looking at areas such as environment challenges. And I think it's more to create a space, a safe space, as we say, for some candid discussion. That's why we started a series last December of Plain Talk, which is actually PLANE talk, which is designed to actually host people who would like to offer some ideas, not necessarily the most conventional or the most institutional ideas, but try in a way to bring the debate to a different level of interaction. And as we want this group to be very interactive and inclusive, that's why we thought of having these two brainstorming sessions as a way to get all of our well-wishers and stakeholders to participate in the formulation of both the how and the what. So that's basically it. Hope that helps.
That's perfect. Thank you, Vijay. I think having explained that wonderfully, I mean, for me, it comes from two sides, being out in Asia for the last 13 years, but prior to that, you know, having experienced Europe market, American market, Middle East markets in aviation. I mean, I think the COVID crisis in particular, and just before, there was already calls for reform at some of these international institutions that you've named. And I would probably add to that, you know, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and even WHO itself has been called into question about its late reaction, if you like, to the crisis and announcing it as a pandemic only in March. But when it comes back to aviation, as you've mentioned, you've got ICAO, you've got IATA, you've got ACI, the three big ones in particular that cover sort of a global footprint of members. And, you know, selfishly, I've been in the business and general aviation sector for the last decade. And that's a sector that has typically been overlooked in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to policies on a global and regional basis. We've certainly been second to all the slot conversations at major hub airports and competing with the commercial airliners. And I'm not asking for any pity, I'm far from it. But what I would say is, the question is it time, given the pandemic, to look at reform at ICAO level and potentially knocking heads together between, for instance, the regulators of FAA and IATA to take this opportunity to bring them closer together on standardization of some of the licensing requirements and operational requirements, especially at manufacturing and in operational side, because that would address some of the cost concerns and the cost pressures from these hard hit airlines, as well as other stakeholders, And obviously, anything that can reduce the cost in regulation that becomes more standard, that will help pass on some of those cost savings to keep, we hope, costs down, when inevitably we're expecting higher ticket prices in a COVID recovery just because of the reduced capacity and other factors. So I think I'd like to raise the question with this group, agree with me, whether we look at raising the opportunity to air our concern, well, not concerns, but sort of recommendations to look at having some review of certain areas of commonality where, you know, we've probably got some pilots on the group and other operational experts, years in the business, who have had pain over the years themselves, where there's kind of been this stubbornness from both sides not to come together and reach a consensus on the way forward. So that's one area I would think. The other one is really about, you know, again, keeping it sort of a trade related because, and policy related. We've heard a lot about, you know, open skies and freedoms and some of the dilemmas about ghost flights having to be operated during this COVID crisis just because to keep their slots intact, which seems crazy when it comes to the climate issue that we talked about earlier, that you mentioned. So I would like to see more pressure be put on governments to address the freedoms of the sky. You know, there's historic freedoms there, but is it really fair? Is it a fair rules-based system in how people get these flights? There was talk about the timing reviews, Asia flights versus, you know, European arrivals when they depart and arrive. Again, trying to reduce some of that hold pattern flying that's causing unnecessary fuel burn in the sky. So there's lots, these are more on the policy side, but, you know, maybe on the practical side, it's just sort of airing our collective view. If there is a consensus to put pressure on regulators to have a bit more engagement with stakeholders on a wider basis, more of a global stage rather than just regional. Because I do think aviation is a global business. So that's my points, Vijay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Two very interesting points which I have noted. Paul Steele.
Yes, hi, Vijay. How are you? Good to see you.
Very well. Good to see you again.
So let me just briefly introduce myself. Paul Steele. I was the former corporate secretary of IATA and executive director of the Air Transport Action Group. So worked for a fair number of years on many of the issues that we're facing. I guess I'd like to echo some of the points that Michael made that I think are very constructive. And right up front, I think it's important to say that I don't think that there is a return back to where things were. There is no going back. We've got to look forward. We can't dream of what was. We've got to think about what can be. And I think what the other point I would make is you can't just think of aviation in isolation. In the face of this pandemic, we're part of a global, you know, economy, a global system, and we're one important but relatively small part. And unfortunately, in a crisis like this, when it comes to the focus of governments, we tend to get forgotten to some extent, even though we're a vital part of the recovery that eventually will come. I think, to echo Michael's point, what this has shown to me and put into stark focus is the weaknesses and, in fact, failure of the current institutional frameworks around the world to deal with a situation like this. We have seen there is no potential body that can do the necessary joined up thinking between health policy, transport policy, etc., that would help us get through this crisis faster. So I think the point about the institutional frameworks and having to rethink how we would approach this in the future, because everyone says this is not the last time we're going to have a pandemic, and maybe the next one may be even worse. The second point is, and again, now I'm no longer in the industry, I can be critical of the industry in a more constructive way, I hope. And that is that all I seem to have sensed from many of the key players in the industry is this is costing us a fortune. You know, give us subsidies, give us support. And while that's important, because let's not forget, there are millions and millions of jobs at stake, there are livelihoods at stake, etc. It's not necessarily the best way to attract government's attention at a time like this. Where I think the international travel and tourism community needs to step up is to work more collaboratively at the global level, as Michael suggested, to remind people of the role of aviation, the role of travel and tourism in rebuilding that economy of the future. And I think, you know, the institutions are all there, but everybody's working in a fragmented way at the moment, whether that be sort of the global organizations like ICAO, IATA, WTTC, all these other people, you know, let alone WHO, UNWTO, etc. So how can we forge something together that will enable us to find a platform to rethink what the future of travel and tourism would be? And how do we then raise the voice of travel and tourism on that global stage to really help drive forward the recovery from the current situation? So I'll leave it there, Vijay, but they're my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I think both you and Michael raised a very interesting point, and very relevant, because part of the mandate of this group, or the challenge, is basically to try to be helpful, i.e. to try to bring some positivity to what we are going through. In a way, how do we help everybody do better next time? And to be able to do that obviously requires us to look back on what happened, who did what and when, and learn from that, and in a way try to recommend some better pathways going forward, so that next time, or in fact the next wave and next strain of the virus, or the next pandemic, are all dealt much better, in a much more cohesive, in a much more trustworthy, and much more impactful way. So I think this would be, to me, one definite trend, because if you look back on who said what, for example, in January last year, it's actually quite revealing, looking at how things turn out afterwards, and whether the institutions which spoke as they did then remain credible and trustworthy as things unfolded. So this is a very, and that's why I think the idea of having candid discussions, because nobody is trying to either demolish or defend unreasonably any institution or anybody in particular. The idea is to get the ideas across and see how we can do things better. So can I ask Catherine Tabon to please unmute herself and join, and then afterwards I'll have Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm very sorry to have written the message twice, Vijay. I didn't know. I was looking for raise your hand and I couldn't find it. I don't want to get in before Chris. If Chris would like to have the floor, please.
No,
go ahead.
Crane is pointing his hand at you, Catherine. So you go ahead.
Yes, okay. Well, the point I wish to make was this. First of all, I agree with both speakers, what speakers have said. I think before one goes all over the place, actually, one needs to go down to basics. What both speakers, both Michael and Paul, have said is all very correct, but there is such a multitude of points and facts that have to be drawn together that if one progresses too fast, you tend to lose a lot of the material along the way. So what both speakers have said is correct. I think the best way to interpret what has been said is to say we need to dissect and analyze the problem and break it down into different parts, and then find the solution and possible solutions for each part. Now, what Michael said, and even what Paul has said, can be divided into two. The first part is the regulatory part. If we can find the common denominators to attack the regulatory part, and then on a separate page attack the economic part, the part that has to do with the financials, with the industry, with the setup, with the way things are done, I think we will achieve more. With the regulatory part, the common denominator, if we can start from the passenger, no passenger is going to put his foot outside his front door, not even to go to a local pub or to a local restaurant, unless he knows that it is safe for him or his family. So I think if from the regulatory part we can create a basis, create a number of factors that we can say, listen, these are the factors on which we need to work nationally and internationally. Okay, one of them, for example, just to give you an example, the debate is now on, do we need to have the inoculation before we fly? Do you need to be inoculated before you go to a restaurant, before you are allowed in a restaurant? Now, if we decide on this, for example, particular point, that yes, airlines need to have passengers inoculated before they board the aircraft, okay? That is common with the airports, with the cruise liners, with the airlines, with the hotels, everywhere, with the restaurants, all sectors of travel and tourism. So if you home in on a subject, on a topic of that sort, then you can basis, you have the basis for attacking um, on the regulatory side and saying, listen, to national governments and to international bodies, all of us, all the groups, CANZO, ACI, IATA, etc., need to have, need to support these industries, travel in all its widest sense, to have this common approach, because it is no use there being the rule in one country or with one airline, but not with all the countries and all the airlines, etc., cruise liners, ships, restaurants, hotels, etc. Because if you're not going to be safe along the whole chain, you are not going to travel if you are a passenger. It's useless telling a passenger you're going to be safe on X airline, but once you get off the airline, the aircraft, then you don't know what you're going to find at the other end. So I think first find the common denominators, attack on each particular element, have a scheme, have a timeline, have an approach. Okay, and then one can look at the other factors, the economic factor. I agree completely. Governments at the moment are under pressure. They can't fork out any more money. They will fork out money, but if they are very convinced. Why? Because they are too busy forking out money. Have an approach. They are too busy forking out money for the national population and medically and other infrastructural needs. So it's true. There's going to be very little feedback if we just say, listen, we need money. But you can involve government in other things. One of them is employment. Most airlines today, probably it will be easier for them, although they don't wish to do so, to lay off people than to keep them, even though those people are very experienced. And the problem is, this problem is not going to go away before 3 years. How can an airline keep all its staff for 3 years, even though that staff has been trained and even though that staff is necessary for their operations, but keep them for 3 years doing nothing? So it's easier for any airline to lay off rather than keep those members of staff in. But you can find ways of involving national governments and perhaps even at an international level have backing for example, retraining, for we can come up with various ideas as to how you can keep employees in place. These are the type of thoughts. I don't want to take more of your time, though.
No, excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I mean, you've covered some significant grounds. And the good thing, I think, which I see here, is how it's connected with the original thoughts we had about the institutional role. Because when you mention vaccines, it's the same as discussions about quarantines and so on. There should be some commonality and some, if you want, credible thrust and uniformity in this process, which clearly is lacking at the moment. You have some airlines indicating that they will only accept passengers if they have basically shown a vaccination certificate. Some countries are not applying the same rules. Other airlines are not even talking about this. So it's going to create even more confusion going forward. And I think this is where I'm saying, where we learn from, let's say, what happened since the beginning of this pandemic, we can probably start to set out some different parameters for ensuring that the uniformity which is required comes through. Because interestingly, if you think about it, I was actually refreshing myself. If you look at the Chicago Convention, right? The Chicago Convention of 1944, which governs international civil aviation and actually set up the ICAO, in the preamble talks about the abuse of civil aviation becoming a threat to general security. And it talked about the need for air transport services to be operated soundly. Soundly means basically securely. And interestingly, Article 13, which talks about entry and clearance regulations, mentions that the laws and regulations of a contracting state as to admission to or departure from its territory of passengers, crew, or cargo of aircraft, such as regulations relating to entry, clearance, immigration, passport, customs, and quarantine, shall be complied with. Article 14, which is actually a whole paragraph on the prevention of the spread of disease, referring there to effective measures being taken to prevent the spread by means of air navigation of cholera, typhus epidemic, smallpox, yellow fever, plague, and such other communicable diseases as the contracting states shall from time to time decide to designate. So these issues were there. It's actually in the foundation charter of international civil aviation. And somehow we seem to have lost our bearings or our track, either with different institutions doing different things. And we are now, in a way, seeing that lack of coordination, the lack of uniformity, going to obviously confuse passengers and stakeholders alike. Chris.
Thank you, Vijay. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Good to see so many friends on the call. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Weigand. I'm the CEO of the Airlines Association of Southern Africa. So my area is the SADC region, but I do a lot of work with my colleagues throughout Africa. And obviously we also do interact a lot with IATA on global matters. So to address your question, Vijay, on the how can we be more effective, I think the most important aspect that I can see is what is obviously trying to enhance the link between aviation and tourism, which in the past have sometimes been a bit apart in terms of some of their strategies, and to obviously get the message across as to what is required. I think the interesting thing about having gone through this past year is that aviation, travel, and tourism have certainly got plans to recover, and they actually know what they want to do, and they know that they have to get back into business, and they need to grow their business as quickly as possible to recoup losses and to try and get back into a cash positive situation. But one of the problems that we're having is obviously the role of the state in this. And the problem is that the state makes all the decisions at the moment. And I'm sure it happens around the world that although government understands the economic impact of what's happened to our industries, both aviation and tourism, but they make the decisions on how much lockdown we have to go to, what the quarantine situation is, what the testing, etc., is done. And it's often not done with sufficient consultation with industry. So obviously work is done to grow, but then government makes decisions, which you can obviously we understand, we support the need to obviously to mitigate the risk of transmission, but we all go a step backwards when the lockdowns are put in place, and we have to then start from the beginning, and therefore we come together and that. So I'm sure in many states around the world, I know in our country, that there's obviously reactions against that from industry, and it can be quite vociferous at times. So the important aspect is to try and influence government, but we've also seen that our ability to influence government is somewhat limited. ICAO, through its CART system, put together a process whereby, and that was obviously supported a lot by the aviation industry, to try and achieve some sort of an alignment with all the measures that we have to do between the states. So that I think what Catherine referred to is about trying to get everybody on the same page and working from the same book. And that is, it's all well and good to have a document in principle and agreed and supported, but I don't think many of us have seen that actually applied in practice. Because when something happens internally within a state, that government makes a certain restraints in that area. So we know IATA, I think Paul has mentioned as well, they continue to urge government. We've always supported that. But again, to Catherine's point, there's no ability really of states, and certainly not on our continent, I believe, to be able to pour money into the aviation industry, although we've asked, but we haven't got. And they're obviously got a lot of other very important socioeconomic challenges to deal with and to solve in terms of trying to address the poverty area in our continent, and obviously education and just trying to assist the have-nots with recovery. So in terms of looking at the WTN role, which I understand from reading your background documentation, I would see this role of this group as trying to influence, possibly on a regional, on an international basis, where either through the UN, through the WTO, through ICAO, through the World Health Organization, to try and find some way to convince the regions to find a regional solutions, or to try and implement aligned solutions within the region. And I know that the regions have in many ways got autonomy on how to actually implement this. So even if you do it initially as a regional basis, say Africa, say EU, say Asia, is there not some way to get at least some alignment within your regions, and then try and find a common means to get an alignment? And we have to deal with the different dynamics. So I'm trying to look at it more from I think all the other speakers have made absolutely valid suggestions, but I'm trying to think if there's a way in which we can try and change the mindset of government, or influence government to deal with dynamics, because we're going to continue to push our agendas within our region, and we're going to continue to try and get people, states to open up, to apply the same sort of principles, whether it be PCR tests or of some nature, just get the consistent application so that you're confident that when people travel, because I think what we've done is we're losing the confidence, this patchwork stuff, we're losing the confidence of the passengers, and they're disappearing. We've seen what should have been a good December and January, for example, in our region has been not good. And I've just come off another webinar where they're talking about the progression for the future, and January, February, March, it's not looking great. Capacity is being taken away from the market at a great rate. And that sort of information I'm sure is available. So that's just my start off, Vijay, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chris. Again, I like the ideas being sort of added on to the thrust of the earlier interventions in terms of how do we add value through influencing institutions and to be, in a way, rebuild that confidence in a sector which is so dependent on confidence. Simon, please. Simon Pivot.
Thanks very much, Vijay. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much for the invitation. Very nice to see you again after all these years, and to see a number of other names on the call that I know. If I may, by way of introduction, I'm a lawyer in private practice in London with Bird & Bird, and we work across most of our offices, right across the aviation and travel sector. So we've been following and advising on the events of the last year or so with a certain amount of trepidation for the industries. The principal point I was going to make was triggered by the suggestion we should be looking at what steps can be used to rebuild confidence in the industry. One of the major elements that we've been looking at, and which has been commented on but by a number of politicians, media, industry commentators, has been the confidence in the sector in circumstances where people either can't travel as they intend or are prevented from travel either by local or destination government rules or because airlines in particular are cancelling operations. And that created a huge amount of political and commercial furore last summer over the need to refund travellers what they paid up front for flights or holidays, etc. As of now, a lot of commentators saying that this is one of the critical confidence factors, particularly among European politicians, saying this is a critical factor for rebuilding consumer trust in the sector. My own view is it's probably slightly inflated, and that a lot of consumers understand the position that the industry is in. But where it takes me is that we, just in that particular area, we have an enormous patchwork of rules which on no view were designed to be implemented in circumstances like this, because broadly industry rules are not designed for instances like this, but nevertheless they obviously have to be respected and applied. That probably, and there's a lot of debate as to what needs to happen. That goes right back to things like airline financial fitness in the first place. In Europe, we've got a mechanism that goes back to the dawn of the third package, but the financial fitness requirements on airlines are worth about 6 months trading. Are we going to see that being tightened up, or is that something that airlines should be taking upon themselves? Then it goes through, are we going to have protection in relation to flight-only packages, all of those kind of things? Are we going to have mandated use of trust funds or ring-fenced money until service is delivered and all of that kind of thing? Now, what we already have is massively complicated, and it's exacerbated, as other speakers have commented, by the fact that it's not just a case of rule of law, it's a case of rule of laws and multiple laws and lots of different ways of doing things, which not only make it incredibly complicated for participants in an international business, but adds huge amounts of cost to the system. So that, I think, is an area which inevitably is going to be up for grabs as the dust settles after COVID, and where perhaps a grouping such as this might be able to play a part. That obviously takes me to all the points that have been made about regulatory alignment. And speaking from the UK, we're feeling a little bit sensitive at the moment, having spent 30 years investing in harmonized rules with the rest of Europe, and now be told we have to set our own rules our own way and go for regulatory divergence rather than convergence. But that's possibly just a sort of slightly political view as to what's been happening in this country over the last 4 years. So that was the point I was going to make, Vijay. And perhaps just to apologize, I'm afraid I only became involved in this at pretty short notice, and I've got other commitments this morning. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stay for the entire duration this morning, but thanks again for the opportunity to take part and to have a little say.
Thank you, Simon. I think you also bring an important point about the financial situation, because obviously the airline sector is in dire straits. I mean, airlines have debts in excess of $651 billion and lost $118.5 billion last year, according to IATA. And governments have so far supported the airlines with $173 billion. But according to IATA, only last week, airlines need another 70 or 80 billion of government support to get through the current crisis up to, let's say, June. So these are critical issues and numbers which put the context of the challenge in perhaps in a very more magnified way, because these finances from governments will very much depend on how the sector is perceived by the community at large. So it's not just a question of the sector saying we need money, it's a question of whether you are seen to be deserving that money, and if that money is going to be put to productive use. Shamsu.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First of all, thank you, Vijay, for inviting me to this discussion. Good afternoon, everyone. I have my point is this. First, our industry serves the whole community worldwide, public, governments, but we seem to be a closed industry where our issues are not shared or understood by the rest of the community. Faced to COVID, the governments are putting in place safety protocols, and we seem to be the only one to believe that our industry is safe and is not a threat, to these safety protocols worldwide. So for me, it shows a lack of communication at the global level and at all levels, and at local levels as well. So the question we need to ask ourselves is the travel and tourism industry a threat to the safety protocols or safety issues that the government and the publics are facing? My answer, and obviously within this community, our answer is no. But who else can share that conviction with us? And I think that's where the problem lies. We need to work together, certainly, with ICAO, IATA, all the initiatives that are being taken at the global level and at local level, but also within the industry to make sure that our standards are aligned with those concerns, that global concerns that government face today. And that way we can bring together the community and have real dialogue. So that's my first thought on this subject.
Thank you very much, Shamsu. Mohammed Tayyib, please.
Please unmute yourself, Mohammed. And also, Vijay, there is Professor Snetnar.
Yes, I'm noted.
I don't know, she didn't raise her hand, so just want to make sure you saw her. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mohammed, please unmute yourself.
Vas-y, juste unmute.
It should be on your computer somewhere. On your keyboard or computer with the mouse.
Mohammed, whilst you are unmuting your, and maybe you're going to get help do that, can I ask Catherine Drower to?
Yes, sure. Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon.
He's unmuted
After
now.
you, Catherine, will talk to Mohammed.
Stay unmuted. Okay. Go ahead.
Catherine, go ahead.
So, okay. Yeah, my name is Catherine. I'm working for Lufthansa Consulting, and I'm responsible for the business development in Africa. So Africa is my comfort area, and I'm not the airline specialist, but I'm traveling. I'm more the airport specialist, but I'm traveling 200 days a year to my clients and suffering like everybody from the very limited ability to travel at the moment. And thank you, Vijay, for inviting me to this interesting round. I made some notes for myself. I would like to add what I'm missing in the discussion. What I would like to add is, Vijay, you said in the beginning, how can we be prepared for another? It's always like one crisis and the next crisis might come. How can we be prepared as companies in the future to not go through such a deep valley? So the company view, and then the other thing you said, a lot of money was already injected by governments into airlines, into businesses, and much more money is required. I would say from a company point of view, what I'm missing, what we see in the discussions with our clients is that everybody says, how can we come back to the 2019 levels, but not really asking, have we been prepared for such a crisis? And what I'm missing is that companies today don't use the time enough to define, let's call it pandemic resilient business plans. So if the next crisis is coming, am I prepared for taking these learnings from the last year and what is actually going on now in the countries with the second and the third wave? How are we taking that into our business planning for the future? Actually, the question, is my business model the right one? Because I would say a big number of aviation companies, whether it is airlines or airports, the business model are not applicable anymore. And we are often relying too much on state aid and expect state aid, but I think it starts first with challenging the business model, and that is something where I also see WTN as an ambassador to say, did you use the time correctly to adjust your business model, to say, is it the right one? Defining the right business plan for the future, taking all these factors into consideration, especially a pandemic, and this, at the same time, setting up a risk management system, taking the lessons learned into consideration to be prepared for, let's say, in a staggered way of, if such crisis happens again, how can we react? I think there's a lot we learn within our businesses, and because of the exchanges and the webinars and our networks, what went good, what went wrong, and there are a lot of things what we can use also in regards to collaborative strategies. There are a number of airlines and tourism organizations who work tightly together before the crisis and who doing it today because they're adjusting to the new requirements of the market. But that can be more spread and more implemented in the companies. And another point when it comes to WTN, is two things I see where you can be an ambassador to. One is it requires, like also Chris said, massive region campaigns or industry campaigns. What I've seen on the continent, knowing the African continent, a lot of people don't know how far advanced let's say, implementation of health measures to make travelers feel safe again, how far that advanced on the African continent, and how good the African continent was prepared after the first wave. Everybody was always seeing Africa as a continent not ready to start traveling. But that all because of there was a lack of campaign, of advertisement. I always say, if you do good things, tell the good things, share it within the region, with the world. So marketing campaigns from the industry, I think that is something heavily required. And regaining passengers' trust. we have conducted last month a event called Aviation versus COVID-19, where we connected people from the whole industry across the world over 3 ways, over 3 days, to see what can be done to regain passenger trust, to make them traveling, because we can have the best business model in place and the best regulations. If people do not have a common, easy source to use to find out, if I travel from A to B, what am I requiring? And if I maybe travel from B to C, is that possible? So an IT tool which gives the up-to-date, day-to-day information of what is required. This is something what has been started to develop. When I look at ACI, they developed that app called Airports Health Program or something like that. It's an ACI app where I can type in I travel to, from, and see what's required at the airports. But something like that is required for the airlines too, and why not having it in one source? And there exist already, let's say, good grounds, different IT tools. But if there is a common approach of IATA, WTN, ACI, to connect the existing tools to have one common IT tool where travelers can see how to travel, and also travel agencies, for example, can inform the passengers. I think that these things like digitalization, marketing campaigns, making the companies aware of challenge your business model, I think these are 3 topics I feel important to push forward.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Again, I think that there's a connection with those points and the earlier discussions about how the industry can seek and hopefully get help from governments. Because, see, for me, there are 2 fundamental issues right now. Airlines have to, in a way, fix the situation they are in right now, try to find a way out of that situation. And there's also the second point, which is how do they avoid a similar situation occurring in the future? So they're 2 separate tracks. But for the first one, I think it's very clear that the world has changed. And I think Paul mentioned this earlier, that there's no going back to 2019, whether it's the airline sector or indeed any sector in the world. The world has changed. And if the aviation sector is not showing that it is currently doing what it takes to adapt to new normal, and is simply trying to get funds to, in a way, go back to its old strategy, it's not going to work. It cannot work. So I think there's a challenge here where I think that this industry needs to show that it has woken up to this new normal. It has adapted, not just in terms of cost cutting, but in terms of strategic modeling. And I think, Catherine, you're absolutely right in the sense that there's some serious work to be done urgently in terms of seeing whether the new plans are going to work in the new normal. Then there's a second track, which is about how do we make sure that we don't get caught off guard like this again going forward. But I think these are critical decisions which the industry need to show they are working on, because unfortunately, the more we hear about the industry, it's more about we need more help, financial help, we need this, we need borders open, we need people to be vaccinated. We don't see that kind of, if you want, self-check and reevaluation of the strategy itself, which is going to be a challenge, I think. Mohammed, please. Thank you for unmuting.
Thank you, Vijay. Good morning. Good morning for us. I am Tayyib Mohammed. I am Tunisian. and I am a former general director of civil aviation in Tunisia. My country is a touristic country. Et si vous permettez, Vijay, je vais parler en français. Ce sera plus facile pour moi.
Allez.
Donc,
I will do a translation of what.
Encore une fois. Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Merci encore une fois pour cette opportunité et merci pour votre effort de convoquer, de mettre en place un espace pour discuter un tout petit peu du problème, comment reconstruire le voyage et le tourisme. Moi, je connais un peu le transport aérien parce que je pense qu'en Tunisie, le cas de la Tunisie, par exemple, le transport aérien s'est développé parce que nous avons développé le tourisme. Et il y a eu pas mal de débats dans notre continent, l'Afrique, pour trouver un tout petit peu la solution et le modèle qu'il faut mettre en place pour le développement du tourisme et du transport aérien en même temps. Donc, je trouve que l'idée de lancer ce panel et cette espèce, elle est excellente, elle est opportune. L'environnement que nous vivons actuellement, c'est un environnement que le transport aérien a connu auparavant, parce que le transport aérien mondial, depuis sa création, il a connu pas mal de crises. Et je pense qu'au niveau international, avec l'aide de tout le monde, avec l'aide de l'Organisation internationale de l'aviation civile, avec l'aide de l'IATA, avec l'aide de l'Organisation internationale du tourisme, nous avons su, au niveau international, trouver des solutions à mettre en place pour le développement du transport aérien. Et comme l'a précisé tout à l'heure mon ami Vijay, je vais le rappeler quand même que le transport aérien, depuis sa création, depuis la création de l'OACI, il s'est développé d'une manière sûre et économique. Et nous avons su mettre en place toutes les mesures pour surmonter un peu les contraintes et les crises. J'en viens maintenant à la crise que nous vivons actuellement. Partout dans le monde, et plus particulièrement dans les zones qui ont connu de fort trafic de transport aérien et de tourisme. Pour le cas de mon pays, la Tunisie, nous avons perdu à peu près 70% du trafic aérien. Notre compagnie aérienne, elle vit une situation catastrophique. Je pense que c'est le cas de toutes les compagnies aériennes nationales. Et je ne prends que l'exemple de l'Europe. Je sais pertinemment, comme vous le savez certainement, que les gouvernements ont pris des décisions pour sauver les compagnies aériennes traditionnelles, comme Air France, par exemple. Donc, je pense que pour reconstruire un peu et pour redynamiser un peu le transport aérien et le travail et le tourisme, je pense que les États et les gouvernements ont un rôle à jouer en premier lieu, c'est d'injecter de l'argent pour sauvegarder les entreprises viables. Vous allez me dire, le transport aérien ne s'est pas développé avec les entreprises traditionnelles. Moi, j'ai vécu un peu une quarantaine d'années et j'ai suivi de près un tout petit peu l'évolution du transport aérien. Le transport aérien s'est développé avec les compagnies régulières dans une première phase, puis s'est développé par la suite avec les compagnies régulières, avec les compagnies de charter. Et depuis des décennies, une décennie et demie à peu près, le transport aérien continue à se développer avec les low cost. Moi, je pense qu'en plus des mesures que l'État doit prendre pour sauvegarder les compagnies traditionnelles, pourquoi? Parce qu'il faut sauver quand même les emplois. C'est très important. La question que je pose maintenant et qui vise un tout petit peu les low cost, vous ne pensez pas que les low cost, ils ont un rôle à jouer dans le futur pour relancer un tout petit peu le voyage et le tourisme? les low cost, comment ils vont se positionner dans l'avenir pour prendre un tout petit peu la relève de certaines compagnies en faillite. Mais toujours, il faudrait qu'on veille à surveiller un tout petit peu les modèles de développement de la demande pour que les tarifs, d'une part, jouent un rôle pour développer le transport aérien et le tourisme, et pour que l'aspect économique soit intégré, car je pense qu'après Covid, il y aurait certainement, mes chers amis, une reprise économique, qu'on le veuille ou non. Comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, le transport aérien, c'est un secteur qui a su surmonter toutes les crises, car je pense que l'idée de travailler ensemble au niveau international, au niveau régional, pourrait inciter un tout petit peu le développement du tourisme et des voyages. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Mohamed, pour tes propos. Let me very briefly summarize what Mohamed was saying. Mohamed is actually the former Director General of Civil Aviation of Tunisia, a long-standing a veteran of aviation. And he was re-emphasizing this connection between tourism and aviation, being the two sides of one coin, literally, and reminding us that aviation has gone through various challenges in its history. In Tunisia in particular, the national airline has seen 70% of its traffic disappear, and with consequences on jobs and the economy of Tunisia. He therefore feels that the state has to step in urgently and basically provide financial aid to the airlines to safeguard jobs and safeguard their role in the economy. He also asked what would be the role of low-cost airlines going forward, whether low-cost airlines will be able in a way to step up and fill in the gaps where other airlines have disappeared or unable to meet market demand when market starts reviving and the economy starts reviving in due course. Merci beaucoup, Mohamed. Thank you very much, Mohamed. And can I please call on Professor Dr. Snežana?
Good morning. Good
Hello.
morning from Serbia. My name is Snežana Štetić, and I'm dealing with tourism and education for a long time. And education is for me always one of the very important key factors for every industry. Some of previous colleagues said something about education. And according to nowadays, I think that the most important word is trust. How those people who lost their jobs, as you wrote, it is about more than 170 million people who lost jobs in tourism, travel and tourism. How can they trust that they have to continue their education for the future rebuilding of travel? That is one problem. And the biggest one is how can we say to the young people to join travel and tourism industry if they can't say that they can get a job in this industry? And it is really, really very big problem. We have to think about it. Everybody are saying about consumer trust, and I agree, really. We have to rebuild travel. We have to rebuild airline industry and everything else. And as you said before, it's a lot of money. But if you don't have people who are going to rebuild the travel. If we don't have young people with the fresh ideas who are going to join us, we will have a problem. So I think that we have also to think about a specific education for those who are now on leave, who doesn't have a job for now. And also we have to see how to make a trust in the people to join education for tourism, travel and tourism. That is my opinion for the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think you're absolutely right, because when he talks about education, you're also talking about the next generation of people who are going to be involved in this sector. And,
Yes,
and it's true that unless we're able to show confidence in the future of that sector, it's unlikely to generate a lot of interest from the young generation to invest in that education and in that future. So it's all connected in many ways to that need for the sector to rebuild its image, rebuild its attractiveness, and rebuild its trustworthiness as well in many ways.
And maybe if I can come in there for a second, just to say, Professor Schnetzana, I call her, no, she asked me to call her Snow White, what is easier, is the head of our educational interest group. So there's a good opportunity to work together, and she's in Serbia. And thanks for coming in, Snow White.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Snow White.
If I can add a sentence, that road travel network is very important for education, and we have to think about it, to do it together. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We've covered some interesting areas in terms of the business model for airline sector, in terms of the role of institutions, how they fared in the at the outset of the pandemic, how they've fared since, and how new challenges, which are clearly on the radar as we speak, are going to be dealt with to allow the uniformity we need and the certainty we need. Now, obviously, Faisal, please.
Good morning from Bolton, United Kingdom. Thanks, Vijay. I am one of those 174 million who unfortunately lost their job.
Oh, I'm sorry. I muted you by mistake, Faisal. Would you please unmute yourself? My mistake. Apology.
Is this okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me now, everyone?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Basically, I just wanted to make a brief comment on, I think everybody has hit the nail on the head, and with all different aspects and experiences everybody's bringing onto the table. From my point of view, I think if we just sort of go back when this pandemic started, I think governments and big bodies like United Nations and WHO didn't handle it properly, this crisis, because everybody was doing, every government was doing their own plan or their own project that they wanted to do, and everybody becomes selfish. Some countries are open, some countries are closed. I think what should have been done, which we cannot go back, but we have to learn from this, and moving forward, if similar pandemic, this was not like 9/11, or crisis like 9/11 or the SARS. It was an international one, and the way it moved from China to Europe and Italy. Now, I think what should have been done was to get the United Nations to sit down with WHO and all governments, similar to when there was a World War II or when the Gulf War was happening, to make sure that they pass a resolution whereby every country should stop and close the airspace for a month or for 2 months, because normally this pandemic is proven, or this virus, we say that it could be lasting for 14 days, or you know, how the virus is moving. So I think we could have defeated this virus if everybody stayed home, close airspace, no travel, government guarantees salaries for every individual and every household. No one should be going out, to make sure that if someone is going for shopping, you will only allow one person to go shopping once a week. So where the virus will go? Nowhere. So anyway, that's the past, but we have to learn from it. And I think moving forward, something like this, when it happens, this is the way it should be handled. Now, the question is, where are we right now, and where we need to be next? Now, we know that we've got the vaccines out. The United Kingdom government now is closing travel corridors. We are in a very bad situation where the death toll is increasing every day. The virus is sort of, now it has taken another shape. So what we need to do right now is, as the vaccines are available, the vaccines are only controlled by governments. And what we need to do right now is to make sure that, because every country, every airline is going to ask, if you are not vaccinated, if you don't have a PCR positive test, there is no way you can travel. There is no way you can come to my country. So what we need to do right now is to ensure that we speed up the vaccination process. We need to involve the private sector, because whether the government could handle all of that, we need to treat the vaccination as a general election or a presidential election, where every polling station is open, to make sure that we speed up the vaccination process. And this is the only way we can relaunch our industry, because no country is going to allow anybody now to arrive into their country. Let me give you an example. The Seychelles government have announced it now that the country is open for business, and they will allow anybody with a vaccination certificate to come to the country without quarantine. That's a very good move. And also, they will require a positive PCR test at the same time. So by March, they think that the entire, negative, sorry. So by March, they reckon that the country will open to the wall. So whether you have a PCR negative, or whether you will be, but they will still require for you to have a PCR negative to come to the country without a quarantine, because by then most of the population will be vaccinated. I know we're talking about a 90,000 population, but in general, for me, my point is that we need, in order to kickstart our industry, which is really, really bleeding now. I think not only bleeding, it's finished, because every government is putting the last nail in our coffin. So what we need to do is make sure that the vaccination process, or the vaccination is sort of, we speed up that, and it's done either by the government or the private, and it should be available for everyone. And that's the way I could see the industry coming back to normality. Thank you for giving me this platform.
Thank you very much, Faisal. And again, sorry to hear about that you were one of the people who suffered personally from these the downfall, and which is a reminder for all of us that what we are talking about here is not just numbers and theories. It's actually affecting people's lives, people who are in the sector, people who depend on the sector, people who may be affected by what happens. So I think this brings a humanity and a reality to this whole discussion that we should never forget. Because at the end of the day, travel and tourism has always been about people, the people we serve and the people who actually are in the sector. So, and it's also good to see, Faisal, that your enthusiasm for the sector has not diminished, and they're still full of vigor and hope that things will turn around, and that you will resume your rightful place in that sector in the not too distant future. So I wish you all the best in that intervening period.
Thank you, Vijay, and thanks for everyone again.
Thank you. I think one other area which I think is important for us to touch on is the issue of the environment, because clearly the challenge which the aviation sector was facing before the pandemic was pretty formidable. Paul, you will know, you've been instrumental in coordinating and the response of the industry and eventually the sector's response through ICAO. But I think that and many governments have realized this, because as we said earlier, in giving money to a sector which has its own challenges, has raised some issues. So many governments have tried to tie some of those financial aids to new environmental criteria. I think that the question remains now, to my mind, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, is whether, see, if you look at the ICAO, IATA response has been the development of the CORSIA. So in terms of offsetting, the question is whether the pre-COVID CORSIA and the enhanced aviation environmental challenge will be enough, or whether the sector needs to step up beyond what it had reached by way of response before COVID. Because more and more now you hear a lot of talks about going beyond net zero, talking about regeneration, and where even offsetting is actually being frowned upon as not really dealing with the core of the problem, but simply postponing the problem or kicking the can down the road. I'd really like to hear some thoughts on this in terms of how you feel our sector should, going forward, deal with the environmental challenge in perhaps in a more meaningful way. Paul, please.
Vijay, first of all, I think you've raised a very important issue. And as you rightly say, it's something I was associated with for a long time. I mean, my own view, may surprise you, is that I don't think the industry is being anywhere near ambitious enough in the current, not just in the current situation. As one of the people who helped develop and guide CORSIA through the tortuous 10-year ICAO approval process, you know, we come out of it at the end with a scheme that is still unique. It's still supported by a vast number of countries. Even, you know, during the pandemic, the support hasn't waned. It is being implemented. But the problem is, it's not enough. It was always designed as a stopgap. It's never been designed as the answer. And so I think the industry needs to be a lot more ambitious. And at the moment, the industry targets are to achieve a 50% reduction of emissions compared to 1990 by 2050. That's also not enough. We now need to be down at zero carbon by 2050, and that is a huge undertaking for the industry to make. Having said that, I'm very encouraged by the fact that a lot is still going on. I mean, the CORSIA thing will kick in, so that will at least have a significant impact on stopping the growth of emissions going forward, but it's not reducing the base of emissions. I think coming out of the pandemic in the new normal, you know, during this crisis, we've seen airlines mothballing their fleets or accelerating the retirement of old aircraft. We've seen Boeing 747s disappearing. It's put the whole question of the business model that was there before in a spotlight. The airlines that are operating, you know, A380s all over the place, I think are going to struggle. I think the future for those type of aircraft is very much a question mark. And so I think the most successful airlines, and if the industry is successful, it will have to look at how traffic patterns reestablish as people start to travel again, coming out of the pandemic. That will have an impact on fleet configurations. It will have an impact on many different things. And hopefully governments at the same time will be looking at, you know, air traffic management, for example, which has always been a huge issue in places like Europe, in terms of, can we use this opportunity to redesign and really make some of the changes that have been on the table for a long time, but have not really happened yet? So in a nutshell, I think, yes, a lot more ambition, a lot more can be done. I think, you know, the good news is on alternative fuels. I think in the medium term, focus on sustainable alternative liquid fuels from biological resources, mostly waste products, etc. But going forward, and it's pleasing to see an acceleration in research development of electric aircraft, and then looking more seriously at hydrogen as a potential fuel source for long-haul aircraft as we go forward. All of those things need to be brought into the spotlight. And again, WTN could craft a dialogue here, because what's missing, whether it's response to the pandemic or crafting a way forward, is getting the collaboration that's necessary, governments, private sector, academia, etc., to map out that pathway to 2050 and really say, what is it that is going to make a difference? So you know, absolutely, we need to do more.
Thank you very much. Michael, you want to add something to this?
Not really. I think Paul just covered most of what I'm very passionate about as well. Since I left full-time employment with a Chinese conglomerate, which had something like 50 AOCs in its portfolio, I think now that I'm on that other side, as it were, like sort of helping, consulting, advising, I'm quite passionate about the stimulation, if you like, of the sustainable aviation fuel in the short term, because I do think that is scalable. It's just a question of cost. It's a chicken and egg, because as you build up demand, the cost will come down. And right now I'm working with the likes of Neste, who has an oil refinery in Singapore, one of the only ones right now that are producing SAF in the region. But then the demand is still, funny enough, back in Europe and America. So it kind of defeats the purpose if you're exporting that halfway across the world. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done that is very important through regulators, as well as educating through groups, as you know, Vijay, that we've sat on at APEC in the Transportation Working Group. But as Paul mentioned, it's getting that collaboration amongst the different silos that have been typically in silos before. So that's talking to the energy sector, you know, transportation, aviation, because typically aviation is quite separate in how policymakers deal with it. And I think it needs to be brought into a more inclusive conversation with multiple stakeholders from the finance sector, energy tracks, because they're all interlinked now. There's no sort of separate tracks anymore. You've got to have everybody on the same page and agreement of how this is going to be financed, you know, what energy is going to be the way forward. There's going to be multiple solutions. I don't think there's any silver bullet in getting to these 2050 targets. And we should be doing our bit where we can to put pressure on. And I think my experience in Asia is it's back to basics of letter writing. Thank you very much, Vijay.
Thank you. Mohammed. You have to unmute again. Yeah.
Donc, j'interviens suite à votre question là, concernant le défi à relever par le transport aérien pour surmonter un peu cette pandémie. Moi, personnellement, je pense que le premier défi à relever, c'est d'encourager les États à prendre des décisions pour sauver les compagnies aériennes, soit en injectant de l'argent, soit en œuvrant pour encourager un tout petit peu les privés à prendre la relève. Et tout à l'heure, j'ai posé la question, quel est le rôle qui sera joué par les low cost? Moi, je pense, et comme beaucoup de grandes compagnies aériennes, ils ont leur low cost, moi, je pense que ces low cost, ils vont se positionner pour redynamiser un peu le tourisme et le transport aérien. Cela n'empêche pas, à mon avis, qu'au niveau international, et peut-être au niveau de notre réseau, notre espace, il faudrait qu'on œuvre pour qu'au niveau de l'OACI, qui est en train de suivre d'une façon méticuleuse un tout petit peu le développement du Covid et son impact, et l'OACI, elle donne des directives aux États pour les appliquer. Je pense qu'il faudrait que l'OACI, comme on l'a fait, tu te rappelles, Vijay, lorsque le problème s'était posé pour la libération du transport aérien ou pour différencier les vols réguliers et les vols non réguliers. Il faudrait qu'une conférence soit déclenchée dès que la situation de Covid se stabilise pour sauvegarder un peu le futur, pour peut-être que l'aspect sanitaire au niveau international soit une composante à prendre en compte tout le temps, comme cela a été fait pour l'environnement d'une façon générale. Voilà un tout petit peu ma réaction concernant les défis à relever. Et je pense que les défis ne seront relevés, je dis, qu'au niveau international, qu'au niveau d'action comme vous êtes en train de le faire. Et je pense que compte tenu de l'historique de l'OACI et des autres organisations, l'IATA et autres organisations, je pense qu'on va pouvoir un tout petit peu surmonter cette crise. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Mohamed. What Mohamed is saying is basically that I think this group is a very useful group to debate these various issues affecting the sector. And he thinks that probably when the situation is right, ICAO should convene a global conference with all stakeholders to basically chart out the new route for the growth, even survival and growth of the aviation sector, because the situation is quite alarming and needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you very much. We spent a good hour and a half on this brainstorming. I wanted it to be very open and informal, so that you have the opportunity to basically share your thoughts and your sort of feelings even about what's going on with a sector we are all very passionate about. I think the discussion definitely shows that there's a space for a group like ours to continue debating, discussing, and hopefully articulating some thoughts about how the aviation sector can be better and get better. I think as a multi-stakeholder group representing governments, private sector, education institutions, multi-generational as well, we have perhaps the ability to have this debates and find ways where we can influence institutions and other stakeholders to ensure that they learn from past mistakes and seek ways to do better next time, and help the sector bring about more certainty, more predictability, more uniformity, more transparency. as they seek to build confidence and credibility back into the sector. I think whether it's to do with the way the pandemic has been addressed, whether how the environment is going to be addressed, will all be tests to the credibility and seriousness of our sector. Now, clearly, nobody knows how all this will play out, but we must all wake up to the fact that the new normal requires new mindsets to find new solutions. And there's an ever-growing need to create a safe, secure, more socially, environmentally, and economically sustainable travel and tourism model, which is driven by values. So I really welcome your continued engagement with our group. We'll have another session in 2 days' time. And from there, Jürgen and I will put together all the wonderful ideas and suggestions which have been put forward and organize ourselves so that we can either as a group meet more regularly and exchange. We can also go to the model of what we use with the plane talk, where we invite somebody who can actually have some thought-provoking and stimulating discussions, which we can all contribute to and benefit from. So from your ideas, and please keep these ideas coming. You have my email on the chat group. You have Jürgen's email as well. Please share with us any subsequent thoughts you have, suggestions. I think in terms of the areas we would like to get involved with, very clear. Thank you very much for that. In terms of how we actually go about doing this is where we need perhaps some more suggestions from you, whether a kind of monthly meeting like this, whether we have a guest panelist. These are ideas we can, and then we can also, which was Paul's suggestion, in terms of maybe putting some thoughts to paper and try to articulate some clear directions, suggestions in terms of how things can be better sooner rather than later. On that, let me thank Jürgen for having organized the logistics and all of this. And thank you all. Please stay safe and stay well. Thank you very much.
Thank you all from my end. And this session will be archived on livestream.travel. And since you all signed up and we have your email address now, we'll send you a copy also so you can use it for your own records. Thank you, Vijay. This was excellent. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you in expanding this group. We have many other groups in the travel and tourism industry that are all in the building, in the making, and we're hoping for you to join WTN. You can do this, just go to wtn.travel and click on join if you're not yet a member, and that gives you access to all our groups and discussions and also local chapters we're putting together. From Hawaii, aloha, and thank you very much again. And if you wanted to attend our other session in 2 days, it's going to be a little bit at a different time to facilitate the North American market, and you're welcome to come again, or otherwise we'll send you an archive for that session as well.
Thank you very much, Jürgen.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everybody.